Okay, so this is Jason Higgins, and he is a guide at the Emily Dickinson Homestead and Museum, but he's also a PhD history major, right?
That's right.
Is that what you call it, a major? If you're a history
PhD student. Yeah.
So anyway, he gave some great information on Emily Dickinson, and one of the things that she does is she puts these little plus signs every now and then into her writing, and I wanted to see if he could try to explain that concept to you.
Yeah, so Emily Dickinson had a writing process that she left for the people who discovered her poetry, and on her manuscript she would have a plus sign indicating a variant, and a variant is a word that she thought of as an alternative to a word that she had written on the page. And so the alternatives also offer a different interpretation of the poem. So she would write one poem to one person with one variant, and then another to a different person with a different variant. So that impacts the meaning, and she's thinking rhetorically about her audience, right? So for one audience, she might have a poetry talking about spirituality or death or life and meaning, and so the words that she chose impacted the interpretation for those who read her work. So I think that for her, language was powerful and it had multiple meanings, and there's a line that I like to use that describes that. A word is dead when it is said. Some say, I say, it just begins to live that day. So for her, language carries meaning beyond the person who writes it. And I think that that's the greatest thing about Emily Dickinson, is that her poetry is open to interpretation. So someone might have a different experience in life, but read a different meaning from her poetry. And that's why, 150 years later, we're still reading her poetry in classrooms, and it's still relevant because it was so open to interpretation that it speaks to people's own personal lived experience. And there's a story that the Dickinson Museum has about a woman, I think she's from Indiana.
Wow.
Don't quote me on the Indiana part, but it's somewhere in the West. And her child died at a young age, and she found solace in the poetry of Emily Dickinson. She uprooted her entire life and moved here. So she moved in the neighborhood of the Dickinson house because she was drawn by the power of her language.
So it changes the name of the word, and it gives it different meaning. I'm going to move closer for maybe the next one. Nice. Nice. Okay. Wow. Very nice. We're at the graveside of Emily Dickinson, who lives in Amherst, Massachusetts, and I'm here to join other admirers by placing a pin on her grave. And I just want to say that Emily was probably a little bit misunderstood. A lot of people thought of her as a recluse. She did like spending a lot of time alone, and she did that as she aged, but she really had a social life of some sort that she's kind of misjudged for. She was an interesting poet because you have to look pretty deeply into her poetry to really understand what's going on. She created something, or used something, called slant poetry, where while it used iambic pentameter format, it didn't necessarily rhyme exactly as you would expect iambic pentameter to do. But anyway, I'm here today to recognize her and to notice a life that's been well respected. The interesting thing about her too is most of her poetry came into public view after her death, thanks to her sister, her younger sister, who found several volumes of her poetry published before or after she was buried. And so her sister is buried right here next to her, and they were good, close companions throughout their life, and it looks like they are going to be good, close companions all the way through eternity.